Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for this week's LinkedIn Live. I'm slightly off schedule. If you've been around a while, I do these on the last Wednesday of the month at 10:30 a.m. Eastern. And we're off schedule today because I have an announcement at the end that I'm excited to tell you about, but also because we have 5 Wednesdays this month. So I figured it would be the fourth Wednesday instead of the last Wednesday. So, just further to the little bit of housekeeping, this is recorded. You'll be able to find the recording on my profile on LinkedIn. Also, it is available on my YouTube channel for Think Beyond IP. And thinking about adding them to my podcast, but I don't know, haven't decided yet. And also, with the comments, please, if you have any questions, comments, put them in the comment box as soon as you think of them, because there is a delay in between the time that you input them and the time that they get to me. And when I get to the end of my little spiel here and ask for questions, if there aren't any, I will move along, because it is quite awkward to sit here staring at the camera, waiting for comments to come in. But if your comments do come in after I do go off of the live, then I'll get them in LinkedIn and I can respond to them then. And of course, if we aren't connected, please do connect with me on LinkedIn. So today we're talking about AI. Imagine that. And in particular, AI usage policy. So if you follow me, have had a series of LinkedIn Lives where I'm talking about different aspects of AI and the law. And at the end of the day, it all culminates in, being able to use it safely and legally and ethically. And so, how do we do that? We have a policy, and a policy doesn't need to be like a book, and it doesn't need to be as formal as an employee guide, but it can be if you have employees. But many of you may either be solopreneurs or just have a small team, and it doesn't need to be that formal. But we do need a way of making sure that we are using AI mindfully. It is a very powerful tool. And as a result, it can have some powerful consequences. So, but we can't ignore it. It is here, it's not going anywhere. It is in all of our, this is the example that I thought of off the top of my head, but obviously there's more, and there's others I'm sure that you are using every day that have introduced or will be shortly introducing AI functionality. I want to make sure we are keeping up, we're being competitive, very competitive environment right now, being able to scale without putting your relationships and your obligations at risk, very important. So we want to make sure that you can integrate AI into your workflow, while staying compliant, staying competitive, being competitive, and staying compliant. So I had these logos put onto the slides by Stacy. Of course, I don't know how to do that. Um, uh, Thinking, some common ones. But then something interesting happened this morning. So I'm actually going to tell the story that I heard on Instagram this morning. I do listen to Instagram, if you can do that, while I'm getting ready in the morning. And there was a very interesting clip from the president of Signal, Meredith Whitaker, where she was talking about the threat of agentic AI. And so it's a pretty extreme example, but it really illustrates like all the ways that AI is penetrating our lives and why we need to be especially mindful about how we use it. So basically, she was on a panel clearly, and she was talking about the threat that agentic AI can pose. Now, agentic AI is AI that can make decisions. It can act independently. So you can give it an instruction, and then it can just go off and make decisions and follow through and take action without you. And so in her example, she was saying, like, let's say you were using agentic AI and you asked it to uh, buy concert tickets for you and send invitations to your friends. And using this example, she's like, what does that AI, that agentic AI, have to have access to? Well, first, it needs access to your browser because it needs to be able to search the internet for, let's say Peter Frampton. I've noticed that he's on tour right now. Peter, find Peter Frampton and get tickets. So it needs your browser, searches for the show. It needs your credit card information to buy the tickets. It needs access to your calendar to make sure that it's a date that works for you. It needs your contacts in order to um, find your friends that need to be notified. And in this case, it was Signal, which is generally considered a secure form of communication, relatively speaking. And then it needs access to your Signal platform. And then it needs to do all of this. I mean, the way she put it is like it has to access it like at the operating system level because you can't have all of this interaction happening like on device, as she put it. It has to like send the information out, connect, bring the information back. It does all these things, and that at this time it cannot be done in an encrypted way. So even if you're using something like a Signal, it can't be encrypted as it goes through all of these different touch points required to complete this tasks. And so, her warning was that there is, did she use the term no, she used profound threat, not existential threat. She used the term profound threat for how we are using AI if we aren't aware of all the places that it has access to our data. So when we're thinking about even something as simple as, one of these meeting summary tools like Otter, something that helps you create to collaborate, things that help you with agreements, all these things, really being mindful about how we're using them, when is the right time to use them, when it's not the right time to use them, so that we are using it safely. So with that, let's talk about the things, and this is really kind of a roundup of the reasons why we need to be mindful, why we need to have a policy in place about how and when we're going to use our AI tools. And quite frankly, the reason I talk about it as opposed to a business consultant is because of the legal and the ethical risks that are associated with it. I love working with business coaches because they want to help you, the operations part of helping you scale. But there's always going to be a legal element to scaling as well. And so when we use AI, either in the simplest form, I'll call it the simplest form because it's probably the first form that you were aware of, and certainly the first form that I was aware of in content creation when we're using a ChatGPT or a Claude, up to the more complex uses such as agentic AI. So the legal issues regarding copyright ownership and copyright infringement. As I like to say, never use AI to create your money makers because you cannot own AI generated content. So be mindful. Are you using it to create social media posts, or are you using it to create workshop materials or deliverables, things like that? So when is the right time to use a ChatGPT versus something else? And what else do you need to do with the output? Because I'm pro using, I'm pro AI. I've said that many times, even if it takes over the world someday, that we use it, but what are the circumstances for using it? And when we use it, say, to create a draft of an article, then what are we doing after that to make sure that we aren't ending up with a copyright infringement? Give you just a little personal experience. So I was redoing my speaking topics because I've kind of switching over to talking about AI issues. And so I had kind of my three buckets of topics that are going to be, my new speaking topics. And then I asked ChatGPT to suggest some titles because I'm pretty bad at titles. And so it came up with a really cool one. I wish I had it, but it was really cool. What was it? And I'm like, oh, I like that. And I'm like, well, let me just check. And so I Googled the title, and sure enough, it was the title of somebody's article. And so you cannot just take the output and run with it. So we need to make sure that we have policies, processes in place to make sure that we know when to use it and how to use it. Contractual obligations. If you're on this live, then probably you have corporate clients and you handle their confidential information and their data. And so obviously we want to make sure that we aren't using any AI that poses potential data protection problems or confidentiality breaches. And so if we go back to, well, let's just flip back to some of these. Not all of these, some of these are not like the others. Not all of these will segregate your data from their general training data. So we want to make sure that we understand which ones are okay to use when you're on a call with your client discussing their confidential information and which are not. Also, regarding the quality of those deliverables, when you have corporate clients, they want to own and control those deliverables. They don't want any legal clouds in connection with those deliverables. And so, when is it okay to use AI to create client deliverables, which also feeds into, representations and warranties. And, even if you don't have express AI provisions in a client agreement, which is surprisingly rare, and I review a lot of MSAs, and it's still pretty rare to see, but there are lots of places throughout that traditional MSA where your use of AI applies. And we want to make sure that we have policies regarding that. And then there are the ethical concerns. When I first started talking about this, I wasn't considering the ethical concerns, but it really was impossible to not, mostly because it really feeds into all of this. There's the bias issues. Um, when you are using a data set of unknown origin, at the end of the day, those ChatGPTs and the Claudes and things like that, they received their initial training data by scraping the internet. What did they scrape? Did they only scrape, we know they scrape New York Times. Did they scrape, other more diverse sources? And so we have bias issues, and are we perpetuating those issues? I've given the example of, is it Midjourney, or if you asked it to create an image of a CEO, and 90% of the time it was a white male. And so we need to be careful about that. Attribution issues. So this, again, we can't own the copyright in AI generated content. You're free to use it. You don't have any legal obligations, but do you have ethical obligations regarding attribution? Plagiarism is not illegal, but there are reputational concerns to consider. So you want to have a policy regarding that. Again, if you're using AI to create social media posts, well, you're not going to say, hey, by the way, ChatGPT helped me draft these social media posts. But if you're using it, for something where people really think this is you and it really isn't you, then what are your obligations there? And then agency, and this goes back to the agentic AI issue. There is actually a lawsuit where the agentic AI provided advice that was erroneous. And the question is, like, who is responsible for your AI providing bad information, making an error? And and although I'm don't like to get into insurance, but I feel obligated to have to also ask the question, if you have professional liability insurance, errors and omissions, malpractice, depending on what you do for a living, you might have any one of those. You should have that. It might be called one of those. Does it cover errors made by AI? Errors and omissions is intended to deal with human error. Professional liability, human error, malpractice. So if you are using AI in connection with providing your services and it's faulty, do you have insurance that covers it? And so that will also need to be taken into consideration when you're thinking about your AI usage policy. So the policy elements, what tools are approved? For instance, when the name of the lawsuit, I'll have to get back to you on that, Lauren. Thank you for asking. Um, the tools that you're using, for instance, when you're using something that's listening in on your conversations, which ones are approved, which ones are not approved. Um, you may have, depending on the nature of the business that you're in, you'll want to see which ones have different, either ISO certifications or they have minimum security requirements. What are their data processing obligations and procedures? Is it stored, encrypted? Is it encrypted in transition, in transmission, like things like that? You'll want to know based on your business, your clients, and your contractual obligations. At the end of the day, your AI tool is like a subcontractor. So if you have these obligations to your clients, if you engaged another company as your subcontractor, and you would pass on those requirements to your subcontractor, well, you want to make sure that your AI tools are also in compliance. And then, your usage guidelines, what are the acceptable content types? Obviously, the prohibited inputs, such as confidential information, and without the appropriate protections in place. And if you have a team, then you'll want to make sure, like, what happens when something goes wrong, so you want to make sure that is happening as well. So, and then back to this is interesting. I thought I changed this title. So this was back to the title um, of this presentation, which is, how to make sure that we have the balance between being competitive and staying compliant. And so this is, I want you to use AI solutions. It's important to be competitive. They'll, even law firms. I mean, if law firms are using AI, and you aren't, you're at the tail end. Like using AI solutions to stay competitive, the way to scale it, without adding headcount, without adding other costs. AI solutions are super important. So you want to be able to be innovative and competitive, but you also want to protect the company from, minimize legal exposure, make it easy for everyone to comply, have very clear boundaries, so that they're not wondering if they can or can't. And then make sure you're regularly updating it. If there's something new happening every day, I'm on an email list that sends, it's a daily email list that talks about what's new that's happening and being released regarding different AI tools. And, I'm sure it's just a tiny, tiny fraction that makes it into this daily newsletter. And so if you've noticed with some of those tools that you have been working with, that they've added these AI functions, you want to make sure you're staying on top of them. Have they changed anything about the terms of use? Want to make sure you're staying on top of those as well. So that brings me to my very exciting announcement, which is I am doing a masterclass. We're going to talk about it's 3 parts. It's live, small cohort, where we're going to dive into, making sure you're legally compliant, making sure you understand all the copyright issues, how to protect your intellectual property when you're using AI, how not to be an infringer also when you're using it, how to make sure that you are staying compliant with your client obligations, and also making sure your agreements with your suppliers are compliant as well. Also, we will be talking about how to stay ethically compliant. So when you need to attribute, those attribution rules apply, how to minimize bias, how to stay in control of agentic activity. So three-part. It's going to be a small cohort the first time because I want to make sure I get it. I thought I had that. Thank you. You're like my best buddy here. Let me see if I can find um, a link here. Do you have it? Copy. Oh, it won't let me. I learned this before. It does not let me paste into my own into my own chat. I can't comment. So I will put it into the chat of the LinkedIn Live. I apologize for that. I should have this down by now. And so would love to see you there. Lauren, and by the way, it does launch on May 1st. I know I wanted to get it in before Memorial Day and summer. I worried about that it would then you have all that stuff going on. So 3 Thursdays in a row, the 1st, the 8th, and the 15th, and 90 minutes each. And yeah, so, and of course, let me know if you have any questions about that as well. And I will thank you, Stacy. And so also I will put the name of that lawsuit in the chat as well. Thank you. Thank you, Lauren. Awesome. All right. Well, with no other questions, I will let you go. And remember, you can always find me on LinkedIn with any questions. And thanks.